oak forest, oak woodland, oak savanna. Typically in California we think of oaks growing in a savanna habitat as not having enough water to be packed in a closed canopy situation, that they're spreading their roots out further. So is this a candidate in your mind for oak woodland restoration, oak forest restoration, or should it be savanna-like with isolated trees and a sea of other stuff?
So I don't tend to think that broadly,
Okay.
because I don't think nature does. I look much more localized. And usually the woodland is in the moist places.
Right.
So down here in the flats,
Yes.
where you don't, I mean, look at how tall the grass is, especially when you get up higher. You've got grasses that are only about this tall. And you see where the mustard ends. They're kind of telling me where the good soil is. So that's the first thing I look at, is try to get a read on the productive ability of the land. What I'm seeing up here is this wants to be woodland up here. Look at the number of volunteers.
Yeah.
But that woodland,
Well, and the old stumps, really.
and it was woodland and wants to go back to woodland. And I'm seeing the depth of the quote invasive exotics. They're really big. So that tells me that we've got good soil depth. There's historical soil depth. There's been some die-off. I would be looking to diversify the slope. My first move here is to just get these guys up so that the natural regeneration essentially pruned so that they can form single trees instead of trying to be a bush that's reacting to fire. Because it'll stay in bush stage forever, but it won't give us this.
Right.
So I make the judgment, like right over there, see where nothing grows? You don't want to try to grow a tree there. On the most degraded areas, you just skip them. Unless you've got unless you've got like rippers that you can tow between D9s and D10s and make your own 6-foot depth soil. You start eyeballing for where nature's already telling you growth wants to occur. So, you know, this looks savanna-ish, but you start going toward the water, even that's kind of spread out. So like I say, I don't really think in terms of pre-existing categories. I just look at what appears to be like the productive capacity of any particular piece of ground.
Yeah, I just picked up on the use of the category of woodland, and I wanted to explore the topic with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we did an interesting thing. We planted at Apple Park, so it was a giant, nearly 100-acre landscape. Planted 9,000 trees, and there was like a year of controversy over how close to plant the trees together. So we took a tape measure and went to the closest open space and started measuring distances between mature oaks. And it was shocking how close together they were. You know, we were finding big valley oak next to a big coast live oak, both with 3-foot plus trunks, and they're 7 feet apart. And we're like, huh. And then in other places, you got distances like this. So, you know, it's kind of a complicated set of factors.
Right, but you know, if we do work on a restoration plan for this site, we want to use quantitative targets. So we'll at some point come out here with a measuring tape and get some densities or something.
Well, yeah. So density is a good way to measure it. You see here where the grass gets low and you've got the dead tree. That's not a really productive area. You move up there. So what I would start out by doing is trying to break the land down into zones of similar growth potential. So, you know, you've got this one like sweep of this hillside from where the invasives are fat down there. You kind of got to be along, and then it probably tapers down a little bit. So that becomes like one lozenge for your quantification.
Yeah.
Where you can then assess. We commonly use 15-foot densities in oak reforestation work. I've got an old project at Stanford. It's been going on since the late 70s. We've established some of the first trees I planted. In 1989, I collected the acorns. We're looking at 18-inch trunks and nearly 40-foot trees because we nailed the siting. They got 2 years of bucket watering from volunteers, but we nailed it. We planted where the mustard and the thistle was thick, and we got big ass trees. And they push the invasives aside because they get their roots below where the thistle and the mustard, which are tap roots, but an oak taproot beats them. That big woody taproot, once it gets below, then it gets established, and then it can start pushing them back with its lateral root system. So those are, it's kind of a general concept. But out here, I don't know how I'd map it out here. I'd be looking on Google. I'd be looking on Google Earth and seeing if I could see when the pictures, to see if I could identify areas that were deeper green than others, just to start identifying. And I'd also do that to identify like your order of priority, your critical path. Because I really, working from success is gonna be self-rewarding. Yeah. But you start trying to plant tree, and I've done it. We did it all over Stanford. We studded out, 60% of 5,000 trees we planted. So nature taught me, like pounding it into my head with a hammer, where I can grow oaks and where I can't. And you look at the other plants, they're talking. And you can only see it during like part of the year. It's easy to see other parts of the year, but in general, I just started looking, like that spot up there where you got all the mustard. Some of the biggest valley oaks we planted in 40 years on that project. We had to machete paths to water the trees for 2 years. And now they overtopped and they shoved the mustard back. So I look at that and it's like, okay, that's probably going to be a prime spot.
So interesting, the use of the non-natives rather than we've got to extirpate them and remove them. It's more like learn from them and look what they're doing, right?
We're gonna push them back. We're just gonna push them back with something that enhances biodiversity, rather than this. I led a few invasive exotic removal crews back in the day, but I stopped doing restoration because I refused. Because I knew that it was useless. I knew that we would never succeed. And people go out to the same place over and over and over again, and then years later people are complaining, it never actually works. And it's like, yeah, it was never going to work. You have to replace. You can't just take away. You take it away, but you've left a vacuum. So there's something else really, really, really important that nobody talks about. So all these plants that we call invasive exotics, they're all from Eurasia. They all evolved along with early human agriculture. They are adapted to the specific disturbances humans cause by prepping fields and planting. And those are very unusual disturbances. Nature didn't create that kind of disturbance in a large-scale fashion. And it drove evolution. And I mean, that thing is... That's one of the Eurasian brassicas, and it's maybe partly domesticated, and if not, that's where we got like kale and collards from. So these are Avena fatua oats. It's already a semi-domesticate from the cradle of what we call the cradle of civilization, the Fertile Crescent. We came to California and created a different kind of agricultural disturbance. The natives had been disturbing, but they used fire. They didn't have plows. They didn't have steam engines. They didn't have fossil fuels.
They didn't have cows.
And they didn't have cows. Well, they had Thule elk, but they ran them in a completely different way with way less control. But so the ungulates were here. It's just the use of the ungulates changed enormously. And the other thing people leave out when they talk about native restoration, all our ecosystems were created by an interplay of large mammals that we have driven to extirpation. Nobody's ready to release grizzlies and wolves in the playground of the junior highs. We drove those creatures away for a reason, and we unalterably changed the ecologies. And the attempt to push things back after you have removed like the fundamental actor in the system, system's going to change. So we've got all these different changes that have occurred over a very short time that have left us with certain opportunities and, yeah, challenges.
I'm curious, can you give an example of a sort of a landscape effect from a large animal?
Well, so the
My favorite is buffalo wallows.
Okay.
That's one of them. But here in California, you can read about the work of like Alan Savory, holistic resource management. Those people talked about it a lot. But what I understand from pre-European conservation biology in California was that we had large herds of tule elks, and you guys probably know this better than I do, but there were ungulates, massive herds of ungulates all over the state. And they were being predated by wolves, by grizzlies, and by humans. And they would move, and for management of grassland, when cattle, we tend to park cattle. We like to park cattle on land and then go off and forget about them. My family owns some of the biggest ranch lands in Nebraska. They're like number 2. So I've watched them manage cattle from a young age, but they were good managers, but you just kind of want to go back in where the weather isn't as harsh inside and let the cattle do their thing. It's not how it worked before. Then you end up with this compaction. They would always, I mean, it's a hot day in California. Where are all the cows going? They're going under the oaks.
Right.
What are they doing when they go under the oaks? They're compacting the soil. They're strangling the trees. At the same time, they're dumping massive amounts of excrement, which could be really helpful in small amounts, but when you've got an entire herd under your canopy, you don't really want that much mammalian waste product, most likely. So, but the herds, you can study the behavior. The whole Alan Savory idea came from studying the remaining more or less wild ungulate herds like the Serengeti in Africa and watching how they behaved. One of their primary protection measures is to group up. So they would group and move. So any piece of land would get this massive impact of the herd moving over the area, loosen up the soil, but then they'd move on and they might not hit that patch of ground for another couple years or another herd. These are radical changes to the very basis for how the ecosystems operate. So we are now moving. I think it's useful to understand the kind of dynamics and mechanisms that existed, that created what we see. So that's how this happened, and it's been, going downhill. It's collapsing from all the variety of factors. So you want to bring it up? Well, we may need to move some trees. We want to focus on certain areas. Once you get, the way that I think of it is you start with the easiest areas first, and once you've gotten a couple of years of success where your trees are biting. Problem with most restoration projects is the trees never bite. You come back 20 years later and you've got like 1 or 2 trees and they may have planted 200. You go on to our Stanford land, our Stanford projects, our early plantings were like that. We had big losses. And then we learned that we had to plant in lozenges of cylinders of hardware cloth. And we had to, we watered the trees for 2 years. We had them in hardware cloth, and we defeated the ground squirrels, and we defeated the voles, and we gave them enough water. And if we put them on soils that would support a large oak, they'd grow. But I could tour you around Stanford land and show you, I've got 2,000 oaks that are this tall, that are 30 years. So what I'm telling you comes from a lot of failure, but also a bunch of success. So I've been able to suss out the pattern of where the success occurred and try to encourage you not to plant in spots like that where they had us plant at Stanford and we've got nothing. I went into the Stanford Arboretum 10 days ago looking for my old plantings from the 90s. And where the soils were good, we had trees. But most of The Stanford, quote, arboretum's been used as parking during football games during the rainy season for a century.
Yeah.
So it's all compacted and you can barely get stuff to grow.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of understand all the different flavors of disturbance that can happen.
It's it is interesting the input on planting new oaks in this area. But one of the things that interests me when we look out on the landscape here, and we can see these multi-trunked oaks that have failed on the hillside here, and this I think is from growth after a fire maybe 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, right? And so now when we're seeing, or 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So now we're seeing regrowth from the Thomas fire, which is now 4.5 years ago, something like that. And so we're seeing multi-trunk regrowth. And so in terms of managing that, I'm very interested in like active management of that and your recommendations on that too.
So from experience, it's way more satisfying when the trees go up pretty quickly and give you a canopy. They will stay as low shrubs for decades, but it's not a very heartening experience. And really, in a place where you have deer browse, or where you have any kind of browse going on, the sooner you get the tree above that browse line, then it can grow unimpeded.
Yeah.
We did this we did limited plantings on land that was actively cattle grazed. So we had to put up like a concrete reinforcing wire that was like 5 feet tall with T-posts around each tree. But then we used tree shelters also, which work great in California if you know how to use them. So we had these 4-foot tree shelters inside the taller wire cage. Well, we got them up and we kept the cattle off, and that was all great, but there was also deer. So as soon as, and it was bone dry and it was July, as soon as the leaves popped up above the top of the tree shelter, browsed right off by the deer who saw that. It was like a salad for them. So then I was managing and I added an extension to take all those tree shelters up a foot. And then we let them mess around for 3 months and went back out and looked and saw that wasn't tall enough. So we had to put another one. And at this point, we've got tree shelters almost 6 feet tall. And then boom, leader went up, nobody hit it, boom. You start to get a canopy, and it lays the mature canopy, starting from this height. So it ends up it looks kind of like that guy, where you're limbed up once again to about 6 feet. So, and here the idea is the multi-stem oak, number one. So as an arborist, whenever you have that kind of multi-stem, you almost always have decay at the base, and those are the first trees to fail. So it's much stronger to have a tree come out of the ground with one trunk. And it's really handy, like I was saying, to get that one trunk above the grazed browse line. And then you can put all the energy into making the canopy. So what I do in a kind of post-fire situation, or we've even done it, we had some of our trees vandalized at Stanford. They cut them at the base, they re-sprouted, so we cut them back to one, and you largely can't tell anything happened. So they've gone back. So doing that kind of pruning when the trees are small, the stuff just heals over pretty much really quickly. So that's the first thing that I would do here. And the other thing is there's fireplace here. And it's really good to get the canopies up above the fire also. So there's multiple reasons. And if all you've got from 6 feet down is a trunk, you don't have the same fuel issue that you do if you've got this bush that's trying to be 15 feet wide and 6 feet tall. So it may seem like we're interfering in nature, but guess what? That's what we do.
How about, can we go up a little bit and have a look at some of the multi-trunk resprouts and maybe do a little bit of pruning? And okay.
Yeah. Well, anything. Any of them works, so this
Yeah.
one's easy to get to.
Yeah.
you.
And I
Sorry.
think
Yeah, no, get the before.
And is there a best time of year to do this?
My favorite time to, so the truth is arborists in California prune pretty much every kind of tree on every day of the year.
Really?
Yeah. Or there's pines, there's exceptions to that rule, but by and large, it's every kind of tree on every day of the year. As somebody who's pruned for a living, I like to prune in the spring. Because it's when the wounds heal the fastest.
Ah.
They close instantly.
Yeah.
And also, in the spring, you get to see where the tree wants to grow, and you can decide whether you want it to grow where it wants to grow.
Or you could have an argument with it.
Exactly, you can have an argument with sharp steel, and you can win the argument. So the first thing I want to, well, I was going to try to assess it, but the truth is, to even assess it, I have to start pruning it. And I've got a lot of thistle to kneel on. Okay, we're going in here. So, oh, and we've got like 6 different trees here.
Yeah, I was just kind of looking at that from the backside.
Okay, so we're gonna start the one of my philosophies of pruning is to do it just a little bit at a time. You don't need to make big moves fast. Move slow. Don't make a bunch of mistakes.
Yeah.
So, and if you're doing it right, I mean, one of the reasons that I prune trees was because it's a profound intellectual challenge to do it right. It really is. So I use my little saw as long as I can, and then once I've got bigger stuff or stuff I can't reach, then I make these little surgical cuts. My dad was a surgeon. I can't stand blood, but I can withstand sawdust. So I became a tree surgeon.
Yeah. No, it's real. And it's real rocky. I only got one coring and oh, I was getting almost that. Almost saturated.
And it's really, really helpful. So, so a lot of the volunteers, when they go out to prune, the nonprofits give them the world's worst tools. And then they make terrible cuts. They don't make them in there. So just putting in a word for really high quality tools.
Because it did that.
Because it's really gonna.
Pour down at the bottom.
Okay, you guys are starting to see in here, right?
Absolutely.
That's part of what I'm doing. And you can see the tree has already grown some really low branches, but they shaded out. The tree is already making its transition. So I'm going to clear off all the dead stuff just so I got a nice clean trunk. Now,
I tried to get in here. It's all rocky.
things get interesting. We got multiple stems, but that looks like the obvious one to take.
I haven't heard the term lozenge.
I haven't either.
I made that up.
I know, it's awesome.
I make things up all the time
Me
because English kind of missing some critical words.
Yeah.
It's like, shit, they didn't finish the language before they handed it
So
to
being
us.
Restoration professionals, we would call it a polygon.
There, that's the right word. See, I was close.
But then what I like to do is take words like that and make them into sort of verbs. So I would call it logendizing.
So that's Calvin and Hobbes, the verbification of nouns.
Oh, really? That's Calvin and Hobbes?
Yeah.
Oh,
Is that where I learned it?
That's a good
all
lineage
those
to
years
be
ago
in.
and wasn't even aware? I read every Calvin and Hobbes.
I read them all twice.
Yeah, well, the
Exactly.
truth is I probably did too. Okay, so we've
So
got...
I noticed you're not really looking at the top of the tree and the longest branches and all that stuff. You're just really looking at the situation where they're originating.
Yeah, but you're looking at somebody who's been pruning trees for decades. So it's really the unions that are more important.
Ah.
And right now, I'm at a very exploratory stage in my work because I'm still just trying to figure out what the hell's going on down here. Because the tree, it was nearly dead, it burned, and now it's resprouted in like 8 different places. So that's the thing. I can't just walk up and do it. That's why I said it's kind of an intellectual challenge, is because I've got to, like, unweave the puzzle. So do I even keep this one?
That's what I was going to ask, because it seems like we have some more robust trunks coming up back in the middle.
Yeah, you do.
Curious.
But I'm actually wanting to get down to, when I make my final cuts, I want to make clean cuts, and they're all coming up from below the ground. So I'm having to, like, dig as I go to figure out where they're attached. Yeah, this is non-trivial stuff if you want to do it right. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a tree company that could do it right. I mean, once people could be trained in it, but like this guy, and sometimes I leave multi-stems because it looks like I've got good branch angles. So our fattest one is here. But, you know, do we want the one that's closest to the path? Probably. But you guys are going to be stunned if I take everything else out. So what I'm trying to figure out is if they all originate from exactly the same point or not. And it appears they do. So I'm counting currently 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 7 stems from a single resprout point on the trunk. So now I'm getting to the point where, okay, I see what we're up to here. I've got the ground kind of cleared out. So I'm going to start. The other thing is I have to work my way in to get the angles that I can even cut these things at. So we're going to make... Okay. Let's get rid of that.
I can pull it from that side.
Grab that guy too. Okay. Now we're kind of starting to see what's happening here. Next one to go after will be that low one.
Oh yeah.
See that low guy on your side?
Over here?
Yep, that's next target.
Okay.
So I'm not into top-down decision making. I'm like way into bottom-up decision making.
Understood.
Oh, this is a nice hard cut. So hold really gently. Don't bend.
Okay.
I'm gonna have
No, it's
you.
a house pinch.
It should just open
But it's a little
naturally.
weird sounding.
Yeah.
They
Bingo.
almost always end with like a descending
Okay.
gesture, 2 or 3 notes going down.
So we're gonna want to keep this guy either. So now you're starting to see a tree emerge.
Definitely.
Are the birds approving?
They're singing there.
That was a virtual bird.
Okay, I was here. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, now I got it. They never really do this conveniently. They never resprout conveniently. Oh, you're a little bugger, aren't you?
Tough cut.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna cheat.
What's the next word?
This one doesn't have a future.
Oh,
Bingo. Okay, now I've got a new angle.
How did you know that was good?
Yeah, we're doing.
What's that?
How did you choose? Why did you choose that one as opposed to?
I would have had to show you while I was choosing, but it was really low, and it was the next one to go. And I mean, this thing clearly wants to be the single leader. So now it's just a matter, I gotta clean the rest of these guys off.
It was really.
you've identified that as the single leader based on the diameter of the trunk?
It's the biggest one. I look at the location. I'm gonna see where you've got 2 here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna. My last cut will be to remove one of those.
Okay.
But I'm not gonna make that decision until I'm standing up there looking at it.
Okay.
And now I made all those careful cuts in the beginning, and now I'd move faster, like if I did 1,000 of these, like I did at Stanford in 2002, 2003. Then I get way faster. But here, why don't you guys come look? Because we're at an interesting moment down there.
Yeah.
So you can see what I did. So it was like a little bouquet of oak shoots that grew. So now I'm reducing the bouquet. And now I have to do the thing that I hate to do most with my saw.
Just get in the
is
dirt.
saw into the dirt.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to do a little digging before I totally wreck it. But, oh, hey, and when you do that, you find out that there's more stems.
Drag the pile and take another picture.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we're talking. Now we're getting to the point where I can make clean cuts. That guy goes.
Dave, can you talk about the importance of taking those cuts back to where you're taking them? Why that's...
Oh, if you don't take them back to here,
Yeah.
you're going to get 10 sprouts out of every one of those. And you're still going to get sprouts even with a clean cut, but you'll get like a quarter as many, and you won't have to go back again and again to remove them. Yeah, no. Stubs equal more work later.
Okay.
Stubs, yeah, that's a good rule.
Thank you.
Stubs equal more work later.
Got a long one over here, so...
Oh, you got another one for me. See, this is what they do when they come back. It's a free-for-all because they're adventitious buds. They're just underneath the bark in the cambium. There's just a limitless number of adventitious buds that all get activated.
So we want to try to drive that energy into more vertical growth.
Oh yeah, let's get a tree. You guys watch what happens. Watch what happens with this. This one will jump. It'll jump some this year, but the big jump should come next year. But you see how it came right back from the last little bit of living cambium below the fire line. Wait, are these roots? No, they're more. This is hilarious. Hang on, there's another one we can't see, which I have to get out first. Let's see. Oh no, there were 3. Rock on. Look at that.
It's worth noting the trunk of this tree, the previous trunk.
Okay. Now what I've been doing is trying to give myself an angle to prune these guys from. But because they all come from one point, oh man, this is a non-trivial exercise. And I end up having to just kind of chop things a little bit because they're originating over like 6 to 8 inches of space. So they're doing their best to defeat my surgical work.
How severe is ungulate browse in here? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, not extremely severe. It's all now just deer, no cattle.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I don't have a quantitative read on it. From the few oak trees that we've planted, we've seen some browse, but not as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, I think you can read part of it by looking at where the browse line isn't. There's like leaves going all the way down to the ground, and if there was pressure, it would all be up.
Yeah.
Yep.
This way.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly right. It could change over time, I guess, but for now, you don't have that much evidence of it.
Yeah.
Which kind of surprises me a little.
Me too. When was the last time it was grazed?
I don't have a hard and fast year. I think late 80s, early 90s.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, longer than I expected.
That's the most recent date range I've heard from kind of local ranchers. Yeah. Occasionally, our neighbors will have 4 or 5 cows that
Sure,
get in,
sure.
but you know, a herd on the property, 80s.
Wow.
Wow. Okay. So you guys asked for this. So it takes me forever to do it right. It's just
You're doing great.
how it
Thank
works.
It's a master class.
Well, when was the big last year in here? Do we know that?
I haven't seen one since I started frequenting the property in 2016.
Okay.
But it's been generally dry since then.
Yeah.
Winter 17, 18 had some rain, but not now. I haven't seen big one.
Whew.
Did you already tell us your theory of the correct angle to get the stem not to be a stub?
Here,
Yeah.
I don't have any theory.
Yeah.
It's just whatever.
Doing what you can do.
I get it. I get as close as I can.
Right.
Because stubs lead to that re-sprouting. So I try to minimize, but there's definitely going to be re-sprouts. This will definitely need a couple of visits to keep it from becoming a bush again. Because I'd like to get this big one much closer, but I've got wood here, It's like
And dirt everywhere.
and dirt everywhere.
But
So
these are the classic arborist cuts with it leaving, going down to the collar, parallel to the trunk,
yep.
the whole deal.
Yeah, this one, see that cut right there is virtually textbook.
Yeah.
These are both pretty good. This is just a temporary stub.
Yeah.
And my other cuts, I've had to leave stubs. Oh man, it's rooting. It's rooting out the bottom of some of these.
It's really adventitious.
Yeah, it's like a little extra adventitious. So it'll take a little while to make this stick. This is hard cut. This is like 2 inches.
This is the textbook one right here.
Yeah. Well, that's textbook for removal of what's called a codominant.
Right.
Do you see this ridge?
Yes.
Yeah. So that was, so the bottom exits near the bottom of the ridge. So there's no set angle. The angle is set by very small signals in the union itself.
So workout.
Oh, sorry, Mr. Beetle. Oh, my saw, because I'm having to bite into the dirt, my saw gets duller with each pass.
Yeah. That's brutal.
But what'll be fun is for you guys to be able to see it when it's done. There you go. Look a little bit. There you can get a feel for what that guy's
See, I
like.
would have done my before shot from this side if I had known.
Well, we couldn't even see
know,
it.
I know.
I had to. I mean, you
Feel the
see how much
density of that.
brush I've
So
removed
awesome.
to get to
It
this.
coast live oak checks really badly as it dries out.
Yep.
So you have to get like a perfect quarter sawn slice right over the middle, and then the green is just stunning.
Yeah.
But it's because it's all that water in there.
Yeah.
Okay. This is what always happens. I'm an eater of low-hanging fruit, but at some point there is no more low-hanging fruit.
You just got to do it.
This is hard.
Be from underneath.
I made this out of coast line for
Yeah, but I don't even. I do underneath really good, but I can't.
Harmon Canyon.
In here.
That's really
That was
beautiful.
good.
That way.
It's actually from that tree right
Yeah.
up there.
But see, I can't. I'm going to cut directly into this one
Oh my god.
because I can't go any farther
We took down
here.
like a 200-year-old oak on UCSB campus,
Oh really?
and I got him to slab saw it out for me. And
really?
I took the quarter sawn slabs and I dried them for like 10 years.
Really?
And
Okay.
my friend made me a hand plane.
I want you guys to do something for me. I want you to grip the tree here, and I want you to pull it.
Talk about local.
I want you to pull it that way, so that I can get a little bit of space. Go ahead and pull it fairly vigorously.
And if you break it, you're in trouble.
I know. I'm like,
Well, you see what I'm doing?
Yeah.
get some Yahoo from Vermont and he breaks the tree.
No, you can't. I mean, look at me playing linebacker with it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I need.
Okay.
Because do you see what I'm? You see where my angle is?
Yeah, sort of. Oh, yeah.
So I ordered one of those nice Japanese printing saws for my fruit trees.
Yep.
I had to go to Amazon because I couldn't find it anywhere in the U.S. And they shipped it from Israel.
Wow.
Really?
I think the Silky has a site though. I think
Yeah,
it-
I just was on it yesterday.
Okay, yeah, this is years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's all sorts of weird. There we go. So. So that, none of this is textbook, because in the textbook they never show you anything this hard. Okay, go ahead and release. So now you got a little single trunk tree.
There we go.
And there's still one more
Say,
thing.
I'm curious about this last cut.
Yeah, there's one more thing to do.
From a novice, like you would think you would probably leave this one. It's tallest, it's a little bit wider.
Yep.
Would you take like right there?
I'm gonna go I think I'm gonna keep this guy.
Okay.
So I'm gonna make,
Some
for
balance
now,
on this side.
yeah.
Okay.
But it's pretty clear that the keeper is that one.
Sure.
And this one, that can actually grow into a small branch.
Okay.
And I don't want to whack the poor thing much more. So I'm gonna go for kind of smaller moves.
So you don't believe in the 20% rule? Never removing more than 20% of the...
So the actual rule, it's a 30 or a 33%
Yeah.
rule as we're taught,
Yeah.
but it doesn't apply to small trees.
Okay.
You don't use it on, and frankly, no. Anything I've ever been taught as a rule,
Uh-huh.
I usually have to do something else
Yeah.
to make the world work. So this is a case. Would I cut a mature tree? Would I remove 80%? Not a chance. But look at how big this guy is. And did you want to come back out here 4 times to take the chunks
I'm not
out?
arguing with you.
Yeah, but I'm giving you the full answer
Well, I wanted it on camera.
of why. Yeah, well, that was a smart move actually. So we still got. I kind of want to get rid of this guy because I'm afraid the next pruners won't. So it's a classic crosser.
Oh, it's a cross.
So it's crossing 2 different other branches that are well placed. So watch what happens. So now, what I try to do is create an open hand where you've got a center point and everybody emerges radially from there. Like this thing. See, now I'm doing just slightly more than I said I would. And these response is a response either to a bite or a cut right there. So you can see the one that I just removed was a response. And I needed to do that. But that seems like enough for now.
And you don't care about the descending branches down in this group there?
Those are my temporaries.
Okay.
And I don't want to, I want to try to avoid removing more than 1/3 of this one. I want to do as little as I can to this guy. So I'm there's another angle on your question. That's it's a really good point. So yeah, I'm not looking to whack this guy. I just kind of want to leave it and let it respond. There's going to be a lot of energy redirecting up here. So Now I'm going to be super curious, see what happens with this.
Well, this is a fun one because it's easy to come and take a look.
Well, it's a hard one to miss. And it's kind of nice that somebody comes cruising by on a mountain bike, they can't hit the base. They're going to hit that solid piece of wood, and that is a very solid piece of wood.
So I did a couple soil cores, and they're close to saturated right here, near the surface. And you still have vigorous growth of the year here. Are you expecting branch extension
So,
for the next couple months? Or?
so this extension is finished.
Okay.
So these leaves are just going to darken and enlarge.
Right.
And the question is another flush of new growth, and I'm not going to try to predict that. I think it probably will in a few trees at least, but I don't know if it'll be overall.
Oh, and they all have different personalities anyway, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They all have different genetics, honestly. They're all different mixes.
Yeah, that crack was cool.
Well, there we go. So we've turned a bush into a tree.
Started to.
Yeah.
Started.
So,
We gave it the initial push.
excellent work. Thank you.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave.
Yeah, woohoo! That was a lot of work.
that took like 20 minutes or something.
But there's probably 400 of these circumstances on this property, so that's a good lesson.
So what you're going to find if you do all of those, you're going to find that they are suddenly, in 2 years, it's going to look like you've got a bunch of trees.
Yes.
They're little, but they're on the way.
Yeah.
And it'll be heartening for everybody who's associated with the land.
Yeah.
The managers, the staff, everybody. Everybody's, and I got to experience that at Stanford because we planted on like 10,000 people a day would walk that land. So it was really apparent when our trees just stayed as little shrubs. But man, once they start going up, you're like, wow, okay, this can work. We can do something here.
Yeah. So if I'm thinking about like this is a treatment area in terms of developing best practices. So clearly we have de-shrub the shrubs. Would we also want to, for fire risk, like see how that one is got some epicormic branches or whatever, root sprouts? For laddering concerns, would we want to remove that? Or?
Oh.
All right.
Yeah, I'm okay.
They'll get you. They're hidden in the grass. Branches in the grass.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I always want dead stuff gone. Always.
That's the arborist
Get
thing.
your hat.
It's
But
not the woodpecker people.
well,
Right.
they want big trunks, and I'm cool with big trunks. I'm talking about all this edge stuff that's just ready to burn another fire. You need to get that stuff out of there. That's like to me that's first priority is reducing your fire risk. And this kind of stuff is priority 2 to me. Fire. I mean, I've got a house in Mission Canyon and I'm scared all the time. But to at least lay the material on the ground, get it flat. I mean, ideally you get it out, you chip it, turn it back into biomass that you can use on the land. I think that's a fun way to do it. But at least get it down flat where it doesn't pose a fire risk. And also, if you come out here after this is clean, and it's going to cost a bit to clean it all up, it's going to look so much better. You're going to feel so much. Right now, you're looking at it and you're seeing depth, and your brain registers it. You know, when you start going to an area that's really clean, and everything's green and it's lush, you can feel it. And it's not like you've got a whole ton of biodiversity utilization of these dead things hanging down. I would argue that I'd be curious to see the science, but I think you've got very little biodiversity benefit. And given that it increases the overall fire danger, I'd say that it's overall a negative to long-term biodiversity management of the land.
Great. So we have step 1 and we have step 2. Getting the dead branches off, reducing the fire risk. Step 2 is turning these things into trees. Is there a point on your list where you would go clean that stuff out?
I might. That gets to be a super judgment call.
Yeah.
But I would probably take it just from fire, even though it's green and I don't know how easily it burns.
Yeah.
But I think once you clean everything else up,
Then it's going to be
You'll-
asking for it. Yeah.
well, you're probably going to look at it and think we ought to just finish the job and bring it up off the ground and just make everything look really clean.
We've got some funding coming down the line for the west side of the canyon. It's still moving around up there.
Gravity will work on it every second until that thing is flat on the ground and decayed. You know, gravity is inexorable.
We hope to do some understory maintenance on the west side, and that includes, ladder fill removal in the canopy. I don't think we'll be able to chip there, so our plan was just to pull out to reduce fire risk to the tree.
Yeah.
It seems like in certain, if it's below 6 foot or so on the trunk and it's small, almost like shoots and not established branches, it seems appropriate to get that off as well.
I'd get it off at the
Okay.
same time. If you're doing a major work event
Right.
where it's inconvenient to go back in,
Right.
just make it nice and clean.
Okay.
The amount of brush that's sprouting at the bottom of a tree is going to be nowhere near that 20% threshold of make or break.
Okay.
So I think that you're safe from a tree energetics perspective.
Okay, understood. And it seems like, just thinking how we're going to run the labor crews, if we have a partially dead branch that's up here in the top of the canopy, logistically it's a lot more difficult to prune those in that 6 or 8 foot level.
No, you focus in the ladder fuel zone. The higher up it is, the less risk it is.
Okay.
But just know that, like what we just listened to,
Yeah.
it's all coming down eventually.
Right.
It's gonna rot and drop.
Okay.
There'll be a point.
Yeah.
So, but you'll see that, and yeah, it gets higher up you get, it gets way more expensive fast. So you're going to be limited, and you're going to want to use that money in more of that, like 6 to 8 or 10 foot.
That's great. Thank you.
Hey, I wanted to show you guys one other thing is the benefit. Is it still visible? Yeah. So you see this right here?
Yeah.
Yeah, somebody got in there. We see that damage from voles on the dish property, but it's partly because it was so bushy that they could go in there and hide, and they would be safe from predators. And when it gets to be September and October here, sometimes the only green is underneath the bark of the young oak trees. And this damage almost invariably occurs in late fall, or late summer and early fall. So by opening it up like this, you decrease the chance that you're going to get in there and have that kind of vole damage.
Huh. I read it as a branch rub at first, but I get what you're saying.
I didn't.
No, it's not a rub. I just saw the bark messed up.
Yeah. I started losing trees at Stanford. We had
tough, huh?
most years we didn't have any issue, but there would be those gnarly drought years where they were just starving, and they'd go after our trees like nobody's business. And man, we had some bigs. I've got pictures of big old 6-inch trunk stuff that got girdled. So it's another thing, and it's another reason when you're operating in the areas with heavier kind of invasive cover, you're going to have more of that kind of stuff. So it becomes even more important to get it up
and out. Yeah. Yeah.
Certainly the herbivory we've seen is small animals chewing around the base of small oaks.
Yep.
We've certainly seen that here, but you can see there isn't any deer browse here, right? Because they'd be browsed that.
I'm kind of shocked by
I
how
thought
little deer
You know
there
what?
is.
What it
I
looks to
think
me
it's 'cause my
like.
neighbors
Tell
tell
me if you guys disagree, but that there's historic deer
I needed a
browse,
theory.
which is
'Cause
why
it's
the
not-
trees develop their
this is a
branches at
lot
like
of
6,
deer
7 feet.
I always
Yeah,
that could be right.
And then, but more recently there
I don't
isn't.
care.
So if you look around, like you can see, most of them branch off at about 6
Something to get me
feet.
started on untangling what's
Yeah.
may turn out to be
I
very
think that-
complicated.
shooting easy here next
That's a
door?
propane bird disturbance from the nursery. but I think naturally there would be more deer in this canyon. I think that people around here hunt. There should be.
There should be
There's
more.
mountain lion there, too.
And we got mountain lion here too, right?
And I've seen a mountain lion I've found partial deer carcass in the canyon.
Oh, well, you've got hunters of potentially various types.
Yes, correct.
And some rather efficient ones.
Yes.
Okay, so we're on step 4 now. Is that right?
Yeah, I wanted to double back to
okay.
taking all the brush off and possibly chipping it if you have chipper access. Where do you put the chips? Do you care?
That was when we were using them on the pathway that goes underneath trees, right, to protect the,
Yeah, you
the
can-
roots.
Yeah, like underneath.
What is the priority use for good chips?
So probably protecting your oldest trees. So that's what I was thinking. I remember we were standing down there and I was thinking, that guy's in pretty good shape, but man, there's some terrible soil right adjacent to it.
Yeah.
Might be nice to just, start halfway between trunk and drip line.
Halfway.
Yeah, the feeder, you don't need to put it right underneath the big branches, but I like to go from kind of halfway until about that same distance
Distance out.
outside.
Okay.
And it's totally a judgment call, so I'm don't hold me to that, but that's kind of the idea.
And the theory is that mulched area will hold moisture, or what?
Well, the mulch will,
Correct.
and it will begin to improve the soil. But what we're doing is we're taking a guess where the highest density of feeder roots for that tree are.
Putting water right up.
And that's what I'm thinking. The highest densities are going to be at or near the drip line.
So just going out 5 years after putting the chips down, you get a lot of soil fungus, mycorrhizae, coming out and breaking down the old organic matter. Maybe it's not 5 years, maybe it's 10. And that feeds the tree because the tree has a relationship with the mycorrhizae,
Yeah.
trading water for nutrients
Okay.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Keeping
So-
that soil healthy and keeping those
And it's
exchanges
so it's
going.
preventing compaction too, right? Or it's protecting against compaction and the capillary roots in that area. And then I think that the wood chips would get broken down by decomposer fungi, but the mycorrhizal fungi that associate with these trees may well be already in the soil. And the
Oh
one.
no, I'm sure it's there, but
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could feed them. That was sort of-
I think
That's where the
I think
compost
you
tea
put
comes
them-
in.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's why I've got my compost tea is decomposer fungi.
Right.
But I also put in, if we're doing direct injection around mature oaks, I'll put in the Piscilithus, which is dead man's foot, and that's the mycorrhizal. It's an arbuscular mycorrhizae that goes with the coast live oak, and I'm always looking for those. It's like a puffball, but
Yeah.
it's like dead man's foot. Do you know it? Have you seen it?
I don't know it by name.
But
I know
but
the
it's
puffball.
yeah it's but Piscilithus is it's dead man's foot, and so it looks like this gnarly. It's a gnarly looking thing, and then when you get it, you can grate it, and the spores are like 7 microns across. They're tiny.
Are they throughout the thing or just at the surface of it?
They're throughout it. It's solid. I've got one at home. I've got some video actually on my Instagram about it. But you grate them, and then the spores come off, and they look like smoke. They're so fine. They're so
Puffballs,
fine.
man.
So fine.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it is interesting that the protection of the mature oak. It's all I guess.
So the truth of root systems, as an arborist who's done construction, I've gotten to dig up old trees and old tree plantings, and the roots grow in some places you do not expect. They're opportunistic, and because all the opportunities are underground, we can't see them. So it gets really. So we're taking our shot.
Yeah. And so let's go over our steps again. So we have the
Understory maintenance.
understory maintenance and laddering removal. The de-shrubbing.
Shrubbification.
Well,
That was kind of a mix.
That was-
that was kind of a mixed one, yeah. So so that's 2 then, really.
really.
So then our third, so in terms of, like, if we think of this as a lozenge, and that, we want to restore, like, right here, is the next step then to plant seedlings? And
Sure.
Sure, yes.
Is there more maintenance, I guess, to do to existing stands outside of understory maintenance and de-shrubbing, natural recruitment? Is there anything else to do to existing, or
And
then
a
we
little
start?
bit of mulching. No, there really isn't.
Oh, that was the third.
That was third.
Was chipping.
Chipping and mulching
Optimum use
of mulch.
prioritizing the use of chips.
Of woody debris
Yeah.
into chips. Yeah.
And that seems to be here and there because we can't get a chipper to most of the areas where we'll be doing understory maintenance.
Yeah, it's not clear to me you're going to do a lot of chipping up here. You may do much more of like have one person with loppers at the pile
Breaking it
who's
down.
making it as flat as you can
Yeah.
and spreading it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, try to get it down to single sticks.
Yeah.
Because that's going to be a little fire zone.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, at some point, I don't know if you guys could get a burn permit, but it's possible you might even consider burning. That I don't know but either kind of the politics or the realities of it, but I see a lot more burning happening.
Sure. Yeah, and that's another conversation. But it seems like biomass reduction is step number 3, whether it's chipping or lopping, and then it seems like we're going from existing stand maintenance to potentially planting outside of those 3 steps. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you prioritize planting where oaks are already successful first.
Well, so I would look at everything again after I de-shrubbed.
Yeah.
And then see where I've got good trees. And once again, what I would do actually at this stage that I would bump up in this order is to start observing for the places where you're likely to have a high level of success with future plantings. And start having those places in your mind and keep an eye on them. You know, I'm looking at this file with all this mustard.
Exactly.
That looks great. And maybe you want a few more up on this hillside. Once you de-shrub this zone, you might find, this could really be more woodsy up here. So maybe we're going to put 30 or 50 more up on this hillside in addition to the de-shrubbed ones.
I have to tell you how much I appreciate your method, and you have to understand all the puzzled looks on my face, which is to try and translate these maybes into a restoration plan that someone can act on.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm pestering you with dumb questions.
Yeah. Oh no, that's thank you for doing that. That's my goal is to communicate.
Yeah.
So if you still have questions and I haven't answered them, then I have failed. So
Are you going to stay the night, or?
So,
Hey,
in this area here, let's imagine you're planting, basically, from what you're saying, it sounds like anywhere where we see mustard is probably great soil.
as long as it's the tall stuff and it's together in an area.
Yeah.
And you might find out if you could look back at historical aerials that the mustards occur in the places where the cattle used to rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that didn't have a lot of controversy.
Well, also, if you look up at a hillside and you see a big patch of yellow,
yeah.
it means there was a landslide there in the previous
They
couple
love that
years.
disturbance.
Oh,
They-
so it's a disturbance
Soil
indicator.
disturbance.
Yeah.
Same with the along the sides of the roads. Like
Yeah.
if the
Yeah,
utility runs a blade, then
Sure.
the mustard.
Yeah. So then in here,
That's the agricultural aspect. It's amazing adaptation to agricultural disturbance in a Mediterranean climate.
in here, just looking at this area right here, my instinct, knowing nothing about California, would be to plant 10 foot on center, maybe, and just go for high density, knowing that we're going to have
You're
X mortality, high mortality.
Well, no, that's the thing that's surprising. If you use the whole package, we went when I showed up at our nonprofit working under contract with Stanford I showed up in 89. And their plantings from 86, 87, and 88 had a 30%, 40% survival rate, more typical. Well, then we figured out how to protect them.
Right.
And then suddenly our survival rates went to 80 and 90%. So when and managing to, so many restoration projects, they assume that they're going to fail.
Yeah.
And it's like, don't assume you're going to fail at the beginning of a project, guys. Just try to do it. So if you choose the area well, you protect well, and give them just a little bit of we gave them supplemental irrigation during the dry season for 2 summers.
Yeah.
And we got really, really high survival rates. So don't underestimate. And the way that I deal with the question of how much is going to survive versus what density do we plant at, well, if you choose 10 foot and they all survive, you're going to make woodland there. And you're going to answer his question from earlier. And maybe you plant in there and only one survives, and then suddenly you're at the Savannah Model. So you kind of let nature decide which category she wants to operate in.
Yeah, but I like the mustard spot for live oaks because it's adjacent to that drainage, which is going to be the wet.
Adjacent to the drainage is another critical point.
And on a slope.
Yep.
So if the water sat there in a wet year on the property, it's not going to sit on the sloped areas. And I've found that coast live oaks like a little bit of slope.
Oh, they totally do, and it's often a north-facing slope,
Almost
so they can get that little extra moisture. But also, just when you're close to any kind of a drainage, you're going to have more underground water there than almost anywhere on the land. And if the trees are successful, they will opportunistically find it. So you can, that is a high priority kind of area when you have heavy plant growth next to a drainage location.
So I'm going to draw your lozenge around this area with trees, and then I'm going to put my polygon in the middle along the drainage and say, if you want woodland, that would be the best place to get it. If we want to get
there
down
and there.
Right, right. Oh yeah, on that slope.
But down here, no. And as I'm looking at the grass, this whole area that we're kind of in, I wouldn't really try to plant oaks here.
Look at this thistle. This thing should be this tall.
It's super compacted here. No, this area, this kind of flat area, it's like, that wants to be grassland. Don't fight with it. But as soon as but the growth, look at the amount of biomass per square meter over there. Within 5 feet, you've got like 10 times more biomass. The soils are telling you, they're shouting. So listen and proceed accordingly, and you end up with much more success.
Do you ever factor in, and this is kind of always what I'm thinking about, logistics for irrigation? Those first 2 years are important for getting water on the dry loads. Sometimes flatter areas much more accessible. Do we prioritize the better planting areas and just figure out how to get water there, or do you kind of try to find the middle ground?
The most important thing is to have the good ground, because in these compromised soils, literally, I can show you, I have more than 1,000 oak trees that are 20 to 30 years old and 3 feet tall.
So
and that's what you're setting yourself up for in this whole flat zone.
We probably have a generation worth of work in Harmon just with what we're describing in our lozenge, high priority areas. And so focusing on that during our generation, and then if there's, for some crazy reason, super successful, which of course they're going to be, then you can radiate out from there. But it's so typical in restoration that people start with the flatter areas where it's easier to get water, blah, blah, blah. And then
I like this area because it's flat and you can lay your irrigation tubes that way, and then you're not carrying anything, flat to steep is steep up
We used Stanford's water truck. So we had a 1962 Ford water truck that held either 1,000 or 1,500 gallons, and we'd fill it from actual fire hydrants, and then we just put 5-gallon buckets on the side, and we had tons of volunteers, and they did some long carries.
We've had varying success of rallying the volunteers, but that's going to be, bucket watering is a big strategy for us, for sure.
It's either bucket watering, I've tried to do like hose type. We did a few irrigation. It's really the buckets that kind of work best.
Yeah.
And do you plant in a basin when you do that to make the watering
Always
easier?
build. I always try to build. I tend to water in 5-gallon increments because it's kind of convenient. And often people, a full 5 is for, you can have 80 pounds.
Yeah.
So that's for like triathletes, but you might want to half fill them. We always built our berms so that we test them at planting with a full 5 gallons. So a volunteer could walk up, pour a full 5, and it'll hold. Because otherwise your water can go all kinds of places.
So are you going to make a transcript of this recording for us? Thank you.
Yeah, so how are we around, like when we were on the other site, we were seeing so much gopher damage at the root level.
Yeah.
And just as a best practice, should we gopher cage everything? Or is that site specific? Or where are you guys with that?
I've been trying to structure budgeting that we can do subterranean aviary wire.
Yes.
Aviary netting or aviary wire.
Aviary
Yeah.
wire, yeah. So I think that we should probably try to do that on all plantings.
Yeah.
It's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
It takes
Yeah.
a little work, but it needs to be aviary wire process. So we started out with hardware cloth. Very
No, that's
standard
gnarly.
half-inch
Yeah.
hardware cloth. And that stuff is gnarly. You're going to bleed after
Yeah.
you try to make
Oh,
it into
yeah,
a
it's really
cage.
You're gonna get
ripped up.
Yeah, you get ripped up. So what we did, and everybody, when we started doing this in the late 80s, everybody said, you're going to girdle the trees, all the trees are going to die, you're planting them in... We're like, well, okay, well, we don't know. We can't find anybody who's done this before. So we actually went to the manufacturer and got ungalvanized hardware cloth. And it broke down so fast, it would make your head spin. It like broke down in 3 months. It was terrifying. So then somebody said, have you ever heard of aviary wire? We said, is that chicken wire? They said, no, it's finer and it's galvanized.
Yeah.
And it's lighter duty wire.
Like that?
That's the...
Is that it?
Kind of. Yeah, it's kind of a funny angle on it, but yeah. So it's used a lot for like chicken.
But it's smaller holes than chicken wire.
Chicken
Right.
wire is typically inch nominal, and I think this is 0.75 inch nominal, which happens to be a critical juncture. Because we've been using aviary wire now 30 years, and we have had virtually no entry.
I got it.
I mean, voles will get in, but we have mostly ground squirrels with a side of gophers.
Right.
And the gopher can get under it in loose enough soil. But usually the trees grow so fast in loose soils, but that's worked for us. You've got a little different predation profile here, so, but that's where I'd start because it's cheap, and you can weave it without bleeding.
That's helpful.
Yeah, it
So I
helps.
think that's the strategy, Peter, for subterranean is aviary wire. Above ground, I want to try to do. You mentioned hog wire, a larger cage, and
No,
then
that was just for,
For
cattle.
cattle.
just for
We were
Tree-
keeping cattle off the
So we
trees.
Yeah.
just need tree
Tree
shelter
tubes.
So what we do is actually we get 3-foot tall aviary wire, make about a 10-inch diameter cage,
then. Okay.
open top and bottom. And then usually we would pre-auger the hole and set the cage in half above, half below.
Okay.
And then you plant it up. You're planted up. You've got your seedling, your acorns in the top. And then you take the tree shelter and go right down the center.
That aviary.
And you don't want to use the wooden stakes that come with the tree shelters. They want to sell you expensive oak stakes. Throw it away and get don't throw it away. Don't order it. And then get 3/8 inch diameter rebar, which you cut so that you've essentially, I can't remember, it's probably a 6-foot section is going to do the job. You're going to come up about 3.5, 5 to 6 foot sections. And then you take the tree shelter, flared end to the top. Some people put them in upside down. And then you set it down over the tree. And here's something critical. critical mistake people make with tree shelters. And because he's recording it, I'm going to say it all. So what people like to do is they see that, it's that newly planted tree, all that fresh soil, just watered, and they want to stick the tree shelter in like 6 inches into the ground. You do not want to do that, because then next spring, when you come to weed the weeds that are shooting up inside your tube, that are shooting up like crazy, you want to lift the tree shelter up. And if you have pushed it down into the soil and the soil is slightly dry, you will pull the plug of soil out, probably bring the seedling and break the taproot.
Yeah.
How did I learn that? Guess how I learned that.
Yeah.
So what you do, you have to, and volunteers, it's hard to teach them this, you just want to get the tree shelter barely into the soil so there is no air can come in from the bottom and travel up, because if you've got a gap at the bottom, it will dry the tree out like a chimney. So you've got to, the tree shelter acts as a greenhouse very effectively, but it's got to be sealed at the bottom. But it can't be pushed in so far that you're going to bust the seedling when you go to weeding. And then, once you've got it in, then you drive the rebar right beside it. You've got 2 reusable zip ties that you tighten up. You want to throw away, they're going to give you this plastic mesh to put on the top to keep birds out, because unfortunately birds will fly right down your tree shelter and die. We learned that with a western bluebird. First time we used them, we had 1 or 2 dead western bluebirds at the bottom of our tree shelters, and it was the opposite of what we were aiming to do. So, but they give you plastic that either blows off or just degrades in the sun the first year. And if it stays, then when the tree grows, because if you do this right, I've seen valley oak grow 7 feet in 8 months. So what happens if you have that funny little mesh on top, the tree just completely ruins the growth habit. So what you do is you get wire, fairly thick gauge wire, the wire of wire coat hanger, and you cut sections. Cut them about yay long, you put 2, and you just X them in the top. And then the birds don't fly down, and the tree can emerge smoothly, and you've got a couple years to pull that thing out. So I know these sound like little details, but I have done a lot of these, and I've watched them fail again and again. So it's like, I'm going to give them all the information. Even.
Thank you.
I've struggled with a lot with tree shelters. With I've always wanted to use recycled plastic because it's like the cool thing to do, and but most of the ones that are recycled plastic come pre-molded in a round, and the problem is they're really not reusable that way at all, and it depends on how long you want the tree shelter on, but the ones that come flat and then you put around and you zip tie them, I've found is generally I get 2 uses out of each of them. I don't know. Have you had that experience? But I haven't been able to find them recycled, weirdly enough, the flat ones. I've only been able to find the round ones.
I think recycled plastic is a bit of an illusion that we sell to ourselves.
Yeah.
So we use the original English 2X tree shelter entirely. We messed around in the early 90s and tried every kind that was on the market then, and they were all clearly inferior. So we use 2X's to this day, and we only get one use. When we put, you do not want to, in California, so the experience with tree shelters in non-arid environments seems to be very different. So I only speak from the arid
and I only
zone.
Speak from
exactly, and it's very different.
the Great Wet.
So the biggest mistake that people who use tree shelters made, that I tried to teach this, they would take the tree shelters off immediately. And what happens is, because the tree is growing inside there in its greenhouse, it's extending rapidly, but it's not putting on girth. It puts on girth once it's up and out. and they girth up fine, but I see a lot of people, they take them off as soon as they come out,
Yeah.
and then they've got these trees flopping all over the place, and then they put on another, and it doesn't work. All you do is leave it in place. You pull those wires up, and the way we do it at Stanford, and the way I've done this on freeway sound wall projects, we did 300 direct seed into 2X tree shelters on the base of the sound walls of the 101 in East Palo Alto. They're still on.
Yeah.
It's 15 years later, and what happens is plastic's not very hard, and the hydraulic expansion of a tree trunk,
Yeah.
it just.
Yeah.
And what happens when you take it off prematurely here is that you get attacks. You get attacks from rodents, you get attacks from voles,
Yeah.
you get all kinds of issues. So I just tell people,
leave it on.
just leave it on. And it'll split off, probably somewhere between like 3 years and 15 years,
Yeah.
depending on your growth rates. But we've had a lot of success just leaving it in place. At Stanford, that was tricky because we did this on the main campus.
Yeah.
But we even got Stanford to be able to tolerate leaving 5-foot green tree shelters across the street from the football stadium.
Yeah.
So it can work.
Leave them on. Okay.
Leave them on. And
And-
it's the easiest thing to do.
And in my experience, getting the white, gray, or green ones is awesome, and the blue and pinkish ones are just like horrendous.
Okay.
So just to
Okay.
put that up there.
Interesting, but do remember the name 2X.
2X.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna have to do. I'm gonna do a little. Next time I'm on a computer, I'm gonna do a little searching around. If I remember, I'll send you links and just see what's on the market today, because I haven't done a market review in several years. And I think it's time for me to do the market review.
If you're getting the round ones, there's a great company in Ohio that I can key you in, and it's like a father-son operation, and it's like literally their garage where they're making these. And
What are they called?
I'll have to remember that. I can probably find it in my email because I ordered some recently. So, and they're white and they're recycled plastic. They're recycled milk jugs,
Okay.
and I like them. They're really well made.
Are those holding? Because we tried white ones.
Yeah.
Literally 29 years ago.
Yeah.
And they fell apart the first summer. They just shattered on us.
Huh. Well, let's see. I think I'm 5 years in on, but again, this is Vermont, right?
well-
where there's like a lot of shade in the summer, very wet. So that's a different world.
It's a little different, but
Yeah.
30 years, hopefully they've improved the formulations a little bit.
Yeah.
We've improved many things
Yeah.
in the last 30 years,
Yeah.
quite a lot. So.
Okay, and then so tree shelters go for cages. Do you often put cocoa fiber or coconut fiber mats down? Is that something
We've
you've
done a bunch of different things, and because of fire, it's all really kind of weird and controversial.
Yeah.
Because in 1992, I'd been managing the project at Stanford. 800 of our trees were in a burn zone.
Yeah.
But we'd used wood chip mulch, and we lost every one of them because we built funeral pyres. But at the same time, we were monitoring natural regeneration within the fire zone. And any tree that was like taller than 3 inches survived the fire with no mulch. So I don't know the answer. We tried rock mulch, we tried plastic. They've gone back to wood chip mulch, which makes me
There are
nervous.
these discs of cocoa fiber.
Peter, to suppress weeds? Is that
Yeah.
the purpose?
Press weeds and retain moisture.
Yeah, I, the times that I've seen weed matting used in California, it's failed utterly.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I have work, but it takes a lot of work. I mean, the way we did it at Stanford was great. It was very hands-on, but it was also dependent on a large cadre of volunteers and a lot of volunteer organizing. So you've got to be up for that. And, finally, the last plantings that I did with that group, we put an irrigation system in the wildland. I was out there with the friggin' ditch witch nearly flipping down hills. But we put in an irrigation system, but I don't know how long they'd last. So that's like, I wish I had a magic answer for that, but it's, moving water around, it's like an age-old human problem. So this is just the latest, the latest flavor of how do we move water uphill.
And then we've had a lot of, you guys more than me, you've had a lot of discussion about whether to be bringing in acorns from Ojai because they're more drought tolerant or not, and different species mixes. And
The nicest oak at the Santa Barbara Botanical Garden is a Quercus excanderi. It's a clean hybrid of Agrifolia and Callagii. So the sort of strategy that I would use here is migrate the other Southern California oaks in here, get both Engelmannii here and also the scrub oak. That's called, it's kind of controversial, it's genetics, either X-acutidens or acutidens. That's more of a shrub oak, but it can also be intermediate. That tree has a lot of potential here. And you can also use some island oak. But I would be looking, the way that so I do a lot of acorn picking all over multi-state areas. And what I look for are the characteristics of the mother tree. You're essentially looking for something, if all the other coast live oaks around this one look kind of crappy and this one in the middle looks really good, try to come back and get acorns. And it's the super basic human approach, and it's how a lot of forests happen. So watching for those patterns is really what I recommend. I'm way observation heavy in my approaches to this stuff. I just really want to empower people to watch, and don't cast aside your intuitions. I know a lot of people involved in this industry who they have these big ideas that have been put into their heads from academics or from somewhere, and then they start seeing their own observations, question it, but they throw away their own observations. But I really want to encourage people to follow your intuition. You don't have to make a big deal about it, but at least follow where that observation leads, and watch it over time and remember it, and see if you can see that same pattern in other environments. But that's going to be the key, really. I think if there's one thing that's going to help us adapt to climate change, it's time to start observing really closely what's happening around us. Because the truth is, since European occupation of California, we've done a massive horticultural experiment. And the data is all around us. Like back in 2000, I was hired by the city of Santa Cruz to rewrite their city street tree plan. So I was a fairly new arborist then. So the way I did it was I got a map of Santa Cruz and all the nearby cities, and a highlighter and a notebook and a bicycle. And I went out and I systematically identified every visible tree in the city limits of Santa Cruz and the surrounding communities, so that I could build a list that was based in the observable patterns at that time. So big thumbs up to observation, and everybody needs to get a little less excited about local native, because you need to look at. So did everybody catch, there was a little note, there was a new IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report. It's been 8 years, I guess, since they've done the main report, and there was one line that stood out to me, and it's terrifying. They admitted in the report that we are seeing events, we're seeing weather events that were projected in the models for 2100. We're seeing the impacts of 2100 at 2020. That quote said that the science that we did in all the previous reports was completely bogus, And climate change is hitting like 30 times faster than even the most pessimistic scientists anticipated. So we're looking at distances of migration for plants in the hundreds to thousands of miles. It's a funky moment. So that's why I'm like, time to observe, folks. Watch what's really happening.
The acorns I'm propagating for this place in the fall or next year are from a tree that I sent pictures to Dave, and he said that these look like the Ex-Ganderi, right?
Ex-Gander.
You can
Gander. It's made up Latin, so you can pronounce it any how you want.
They're potentially hybrid. But the fact about them, the tree I collected them from, they're big acorns, versus the ones that I was getting from my backyard tree were much smaller. So
all of his traits point to a true Cologiae introgression. And as we walked in, I was seeing one of the little volunteers, and it was showing red new growth. When you start seeing red new growth, that's typically an indicator that there is Cologiae.
Oh,
There's
interesting.
black oak in the... Yeah, I found like 6 reasons, 6 little subtle signs that one was intergressed with Cologiae.
it's interesting about the red. I didn't realize that either.
Well,
so.
that's the easiest one to pick out, and we can walk down if you want to and look at it.
Would you
let's all
guys
look.
mind if for a moment we just look at this stretch of the creek that isn't forested and just think about, in this first phase of lozenge, like when you're thinking about a polygon, like would we just be like, okay, there's nothing there? I mean, clearly it looks like fire damage from the Thomas Fire era.
But you have no growth of annuals, even though you have a seed source the size of a good-sized agricultural field.
Yeah.
Tells me it appears to have a very, very low growth potential.
Yeah.
It's all very sandy in there too. The soil composition is
Okay.
So I would typically put that at a lower priority, but you should invest. I mean, you should get in there and investigate and poke around and observe, and maybe there's some other reason that you're not seeing the growth there that isn't obvious from standing 100 feet away.
And the stump from Thomas Fire happens to be small diameter compared to a lot of the trees around here.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So probably a low potential there.
Yeah.
But you also have some erosive potential there. So maybe you want to do some native grasses in there. So it just has a lower growth potential. It's not a no growth potential. And I love native grass plants.
Peter, I think we need to address the riparian tree issue too, and figure out what the optimal zones and what the limits of survival are for cottonwood, for arroyo willow, sycamore, and figure out if there's a polygon coming up in the middle.
Yeah, that's a riparian polygon, and then going into.
And they're not going to be as fussy about perfect soils.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can support any of those species in those drainages.
Yeah.
Further down you can. I want to understand kind of what the limits are.
Yeah. Well, they've told me that there's sycamores up top.
There are.
And my advice was, where you see sycamores now, you might want to plant island oaks. Because they grow way down in the fissured canyons out on the islands, and we know they've got really good drought tolerance. But you identify the growth potential of all the. It'd be nice to have springtime aerial photos of the land where you could use just the depth of the greenness to make a kind of a first pass.
I think part of that is the stream incision, which has pulled the topsoil off that slope, and you're looking at subsoils.
And drop the water table.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're looking at a south-facing slope there too.
Yes.
There we go. There's another factor.
Yeah.
tend to avoid that orientation.
Yeah. But it's helpful just in terms of like thinking about how specific to make these polygons, and really like how to optimize our funding and our labor and our time scale.
Right.
You know, what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, no, so the restoration plan is a few rough polygons with fuzzy edges, and then it says, Dan, go out there and observe.
Yeah. And then really, you know, have clear dust management practices and timelines for each one, you know, so we're basically saying, like, don't remove the tree shelters before year 5 at the earliest, or, you know, other things like that. Go in and cut the wire tops off the tree shelters at year 3, you know, like that. But I've found, I used to hate tree shelters, and I just felt like in restoration they were just like the spoilment of the universe. And wow, like my experience of them that is so great is that they do create that greenhouse effect, and they really get straight, fast growth.
Straight,
push
fast
straight
trunk.
up. Yeah.
You get
And
the
it-
trees above browse
Exactly.
line really fast.
Really fast. And like in Vermont, in my experience, it's double to triple the speed of not having a tree shelter on. So now I'm like, oh my god, these things are amazing.
Only tree shelter.
And people don't like them for aesthetics, but well, whatever. You know.
Yeah, I don't care about that. I just want higher success rates.
Yeah.
And I have a confession, having been a tree shelter user, I have taken them off too early.
Everybody has.
You're just tempted, it's like a Christmas present, let's open it up.
Yeah.
But I had an oak that's like a couple feet taller than this one, and maybe with a trunk this big at the base. I pulled the tree shelter, and a gopher took it. It looked like it was a beaver, you know, just like just totally over like that. You know,
Oh man, I've had too many. I'm looking to see if I have any pictures. I was just out on my 101 sound wall planting. We were out pruning 15 years later.
Yeah.
And I was looking, it's like, oh, there's still tree shelter here.
Yeah.
And it was all split open, but there it was.
You guys want to start the meander back? It's after 3 now.
Okay, excellent work, Dave. Thank you very much.